Hello, I'm Dale Paris, and I'd like to welcome you to the Library Show. I'm the director here, but we have a couple of great librarians who are going to talk about disaster books. It must be Disaster Book Month, and it certainly has been with all of the snow that we've had for sure. But Elizabeth Campion, who is our Adult Services Librarian, and Catherine Schmidt, who is our Youth Librarian, they're going to give you all the information you would ever want to know about getting disaster books at the library. I really think you're going to appreciate their talk and enjoy the show.
When Elizabeth and I started to pull books together and think about what we both wanted to talk about for this episode, you can tell that from what I've got here and what you'll see later with Elizabeth, the weather might be playing a small part in what we chose, and maybe we've had enough of commuting in ice and shoveling snow and gearing up for snow days. So we've got a bunch of different survival stories for you to share and some different blizzard stories. Some of them are to make it seem like, well, it could be worse. And then we've got a few that, well, maybe there is a silver lining. So to start out with the it could be worse, there's a bunch of what if kinds of stories. One of the first ones is Life as We Knew It by Susan Beth Pfeffer. And in this case, sort of like our polar vortex where we're getting weather that we don't usually get. In this story, a meteor is coming through the sky and collides with the moon and shoots the moon off of its normal orbit, and it's now significantly closer to the Earth. And at first it's just a little freaky, and then they realize that that's changing the climate of Earth. And this book is the journal of the young girl and what her family experiences, and you find, will they survive, and what have they done, and is it going to work for them? Another popular what if is Brian's Winter by Gary Paulson, and a lot of kids have read Hatchet, which the first book about Brian and how he's stranded on the island after his plane goes down and the time that he spends there. And after the book was done, a lot of kids wrote Gary Paulson, and they kind of felt like they wanted the story to keep going, and without spoiling too much, they really wished that Brian had had to make it through a winter. And so Brian's Winter is sort of an altered ending and a continuation of what it would be like for Brian to survive that winter alone in the wilderness. Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction, and so we've got some nonfiction here that chronicles similar stories to the things that are in those novels. This one by Jim Murphy is called Blizzard, and it chronicles the 1888 blizzard that hit the East Coast from Virginia up to Maine. And in this book, he centers a lot on New York City and how the city was literally buried in snow. And before that time, they didn't have great weather forecasting. They really didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal. And so tens of thousands of people are trapped at work, and kids are at school, and people are literally buried in their homes. And without some of the things we have now, like plows and some of the infrastructure, they're really truly stranded. And another thing that's kind of interesting about this is in 1888, a lot of the things technologies and things we take for granted were very new, and people had already come to depend on them, like phones and electricity. And with all the snow and all the wires coming down, they lost all that. And so how did people cope, and how did people survive? And it was riveting. Sometimes there's historical fiction that is maybe loosely based on a true story. One example of that is Snow Treasure. And Snow Treasure takes place in Norway in 1940, and the Germans have just invaded, and the Norwegians are worried because they're trying to get all their gold out of the country before the Nazis take it. And there's no good way for the adults to get this out without raising the suspicion of the German soldiers there. And they come up with a plan to use the children to get the gold out of the country. And it's snowy, it's wintertime, and they have the kids put the gold on sleds, race those sleds down the mountain, and bury it at the bottom by the water, so that at night the adults can come up, find the gold, get it onto the ship, and get it safely out. And it's a great story. It's lots of adventure, and it's really fun because the kids are all involved. And yes, there's adults and there's some historical things, but it's really neat to see how the kids respond to the different dangers that come up in the story. Maybe with all this snow, though, we want to know that it's going to be okay, and we don't maybe need another danger story and another rescue story. We just want a nice story about maybe the good things that could happen with snow. One example is Snowed In with Grandma Silk. Rudy's parents are heading off on a cruise without him, and so he's gonna go spend the week with Grandma Silk. And like her name, she's fancy, and she's a little stuffy, and she's very educational, and she doesn't like noise, and this isn't gonna be a fun week. And so he's not looking forward to this, and it's also Halloween, and this isn't gonna be good. And they get the Halloween costume, and things are gonna be okay. Well, then all of a sudden, the weather changes, and what was just kind of a mild fall day is now another one of those wild blizzards. And so they're in her house, and suddenly there's no light, and the phones are dead, and there's no heat, and now he's stuck with Grandma Silk, and she's kind of too fancy for this, and how's it gonna go? And as the couple days wear on, he finds out that Grandma Silk isn't quite what he thought she was, and they develop kind of a fun relationship, and they have a lot of fun in the snow and a lot of fun surviving and figuring out what they're capable of. Another cute one is called The Snow Lambs by Debbie Gliori. Sam and his dad and their sheepdog Bess are rounding up the sheep right before dinner time, and the snow's coming, and they're counting the sheep, and they're pretty sure they've counted one of the sheep twice, but it's really getting bad, and they got to get the sheep back in the barn. And suddenly Bess the dog takes off, and Sam and his dad are worried, but they've got to get the sheep back, and they've got to get in the house. And they get everybody back and realize that Bess is gone, and they are short one sheep. And throughout the story, the snow is pouring down, and they're worried. And the nice thing, though, for young kids is, as the family's worried and trying to stay warm and trying to get themselves through the night, on the opposite page, there's always the sidebar of what's Bess doing, and so the children get to see that Bess is really the hero here. She's out there, and she's found a sheep that's kind of wandered off, and she's doing everything she can to bring this sheep home safely. So this one's a really cute one to share with little kids, and it's got kind of a fun ending. My other favorite one of the Blizzard genre is Let It Snow, and this one has three authors, three popular teen authors, Maureen Johnson, John Green, and Lauren Miracle. And they each tell a different story, but all their stories revolve around beginning this afternoon of Christmas Eve. And a blizzard has struck this eastern town, and a train was carrying various people through town, and it has hit a big drift, and it's stuck. And in Maureen Johnson's story, Jubilee is on the train. She's being shipped off to her grandparents in Florida for the Christmas holiday. She really doesn't want to be there. She was just as happy to stay home by herself, or maybe go stay with her boyfriend Noah. Suddenly the train has no power, no heat, and they're kind of close to a town, so they get everybody off the train, and they've got to hike across the interstate, and they arrive at a Waffle House. Along on that train are 14 cheerleaders from a Pennsylvania high school. So again, everybody's at the Waffle House. John Green's story picks up with a guy and his friends are at his house watching a James Bond movie, kind of settling in for a long night with the snow, and the phone rings, and their friend works at the Waffle House, and he's like, put me on speakerphone, you gotta hear this. We have a cheer-tastic Christmas miracle because 14 cheerleaders have just shown up at the Waffle House, they're snowed in, you guys gotta come. And so they set off on an adventure to get to this Waffle House, and these three best friends. And two of them are guys, and then their friend Duke, who is one of the guys, but she's not a guy, and she's just going along for the hash browns. And so it all kind of comes full circle, and these are, three fun stories to kind of make the best of a snowy situation. So in front of me, I've got a bunch of different other types of stories like that. They're not all snow and blizzards. There's survival at sea, there's the Titanic, there's shipwrecks, there's things about different weather issues, there's rescue vehicles, and a whole bunch of things. We've also got one of those, how to survive anything, and it truly is everything from a blizzard to a crocodile attack to how to survive a test, or how to survive a breakup, or any of those other natural disasters. So hopefully you're staying warm and you've got something good to read, and we'll be right back.
Here's to the things that can keep us safe. those we use all the time with hardly a thought. Those that are silently standing by to save our lives. And now, those that we carry with us everywhere we go. Many mobile devices will now bring you wireless emergency alerts, real-time information directly from local sources you know and trust. With the unique sound and vibration, you'll be in the know, wherever you are.
This long, cold winter has caused a lot of us here at the library to think about disaster and what would we do if we couldn't get out of our homes for weeks on end and things like that. And that led me to think about some of the books about disasters. Probably the most tragic in recent memory is September 11th of 2001. And so I was going to highlight a couple of books, both fiction and nonfiction, and even a movie relating to that. One of them is called Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close by Jonathan Safran Foer. And that is both a book and a movie. We also have it on audio here at the library. And it talks about grieving and the hope after grief. And it's a truly beautiful story. Another book about September 11th, this one's also fiction, is by Don DeLillo, and it's called Falling Man. And again, it is a story of what comes next and how we recover from a tragedy that affects our entire nation in this way. And although these books are sad, we also have a movie that, although sad, reminds us of the hope and of people coming together. United 93 is the story of the fourth airplane on September 11th, the one where the passengers refused to let the hijackers reach their destination and crashed the plane. Although there's certainly a lot of real-life disasters and disaster preparedness that we can talk about, another thing that's kind of fun to sort of let your mind imagine are the what-if stories. What if this disaster strikes? Margaret Atwood has just finished a trilogy. The first book in that trilogy is called Oryx and Crake. The third one that just came out this year is called Mad Adam, and they are all about if a horrible apocalypse comes to Earth, who survives and how does religion affect people's survival and the stories that come out of that. And it's a really beautifully well-told story. Margaret Atwood is a beautiful writer, probably most famous for The Handmaid's Tale, also a post-apocalyptic novel. Sometimes we can't help that tragedy comes to us. We don't ask for it. We're not looking for the excitement of disaster. It just comes unbidden like a storm or the terrorist attacks. Sometimes people in search of adventure know that disaster and tragedy could go hand in hand with what they're doing, but their sense of exploration and adventure is so strong that they go no matter the risks. One of those was Edmund Shackleton, who was one of the explorers seeking to go to the Antarctica. This is a fabulous nonfiction work about his endeavors with his team and others trying to reach Antarctica for scientific purposes. This is called Empire of Ice by Edward J. Larson, and it's told almost like a novel, but with lots of facts and really interesting detail of how they planned their expedition and then what went wrong. That's, of course, the historical Antarctica when men were first attempting to reach there. Now we've had scientists on Antarctica for years, and they have found many ways to adjust to life there, but still the unexpected can happen. For one researcher who was there, Dr. Jerry Nielsen, while she was on Antarctica, she realized that she had a lump in her breast and it was cancerous. She managed to treat herself and treat her cancer while still on Antarctica because she was not able to get off and move to a more populated place for proper medical treatment. Her story is fascinating of the risks she had to take in her efforts to save her own life in such a hazardous and dangerous place. And so that's Icebound by Jerry Nielsen. In Michigan, we can certainly sometimes get surprised by winter storms, even in these days of radar and Doppler and meteorologists on TV all the time. In the 19th century, they didn't have such warnings. They would sometimes notice the wind coming up or feel a drop in barometer, but it was nowhere near as scientific as it is now. In 1888, on the plains of the Dakotas, a blizzard swept through. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in half an hour. There were children on the plains crossing, and many died, frozen to death when they found them when the blizzard passed. This is a challenging story, and it's nonfiction, but it's a real-life historical event that happened and talking about how weather in winter can catch us unprepared and maybe make us a little more grateful for those weathermen on TV. Another story about a winter blizzard, this one set at sea in the Atlantic Ocean. In 1978, a tanker got caught in a blizzard. It sent out a Mayday call, and a Coast Guard ship went out to rescue them and found themselves caught and trapped in the storm as well. This is a story of the two ships working together to try and save the crew's lives. It is a compelling story, also nonfiction. This really happened, but it's told in such a way that you get caught up as if you're reading the greatest thriller. Very interesting reading by Michael J. Tugias, and it is called 10 Hours Until Dawn, telling the story of this long, cold, wet night. One of the things that I think we think about, especially in winter when there's so much cold and flu about, is pandemics. What would happen if everybody gets sick, if everyone gets ill, and it devastates the world? A novel that is very much a what-if story that talks about a pandemic is In a Perfect World by Laura Kasishki. This is a lesser-known novel, but a really beautiful story about how this affects her family and then the world at large. And going back to films, because sometimes you're just in the mood to curl up and watch a movie instead of read a good book. Another one that talks about pandemics, and this one's biological warfare, is Contagion, which is starring Matt Damon, Lawrence Fishburne, Marion Cotillard, and a lot of other great actors and actresses. It's a pretty good thriller. If you're more interested in factual accounts of pandemics and mass illness, I have a really great book here. The subject matter may be not so pleasant, but it's really interesting, is The Great Plague, and it's the story of London's most deadly year. The last year that London dealt with the plague was in 1665. 15% of the London population died in that year. And although that is very tragic and certainly a compelling story on its own, what's I think even more interesting is that huge medical advancements came out of that year. One doctor realized that the illness was related to water supply, and that was the first time anyone had ever really understood transmission by waterborne disease. This is a well-told account of the facts that make it very interesting and compelling reading. In 2004, just after Christmas, there was a horrible tsunami caused by an earthquake in the Indian Ocean. It affected the South Pacific islands such as Indonesia and the Philippines. This story is not specifically set after that tsunami, but it's set as if any kind of tsunami in that area. And it's The Turtle Girl from East Puka Puka by Cole Alpa. And it's the story of an Indonesian girl on a small island who, when the tsunami comes, she's separated from her family, and she manages to catch hold of the back of a sea turtle, and she survives by clinging to this sea turtle, where she is eventually, the sea turtle brings her to ground after the tsunami has passed, where she meets other people, and they work to rebuild their lives. And it's a beautiful story, in many ways symbolic and allegorical, and quite lovely. And finally, I thought I'd talk about probably our most famous disaster story, the one that there have been countless books and movies and things about, and this one is the Titanic. And this one is a man-made disaster. The ship was poorly constructed and could not handle the journey across the Atlantic. Of course, most of us have seen the movie Titanic, but maybe you're just in the mood for a good curl up on the couch and cry night. Try Titanic. But another book that I found about Titanic that I think is really interesting and kind of not your average disaster book, so I thought I would share and end with this one. It's called Last Dinner on the Titanic. And in this book, they have menus and recipes of all the food that was served on the Titanic. Not to make light of any of these disasters, but sometimes it's kind of neat to see the lighter side, that this was supposed to be such a luxury ship with all this fancy gourmet food, and it's kind of fun to see those recipes. You can, of course, come to the library and check out any of these books or movies with your library card. If you don't already have a library card, it only takes 2 or 3 minutes to sign up for one. You just need to be a Shelby resident and show it on your ID. Thank you so much for watching this episode of The Library Show. If you have any suggestions for future segments, contact library staff. Stop in, let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.